road. And I'm super excited for this next panel because I get to moderate it and talk to some of my favorite people in first. Truly some of my favorite people in first. So we're gonna get started with the Getting Pickier with Scouting panel. So can everyone else in the panel please turn on their microphones and their beautiful faces in chat? Hello. Looks like Brian is struggling a little. So we'll give him a second.
Start your video because the host has stopped it.
Jared will go ahead.
I fixed that.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Cool. Thanks, Jared.
All right. Nice to see you all. Thank you all for being here. So just to start it off, my name is Saikran Ramanan. I am a mentor on Team 3476 Code Orange, and I will be moderating this panel and talking to these wonderful people. So let's go ahead and get everyone else to introduce themselves. So please, give your name, your team numbers, and like your journey through first. And I also want to hear your favorite alliance that you've either been a part of or that you've seen. So let's start off with Shelby.
Hi, I'm Shelby Anderson. I am a 1619 mentor. I was previously the lead mentor on 1011, and I was a student on 2486. So this will be my 7th season as a mentor. My favorite alliance, probably, I'm like a big Canadian team fangirl, and so the A team in 2012 with like 1114, 2056, and 4334 will always have a special place in my heart. But I don't know if it's like my favorite of all time, but it would have been cool to actually see that alliance like perform without getting like hacked and whatnot.
Let's throw it off to Brian.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Maher. I started my first journey as a student on Team 1257 in New Jersey. And then while I was in college, I mentored Team 2791, Shaker Robotics. And now I am mentoring Team 353, the Megalodons in Brooklyn. My favorite alliance I've been on is the number 4 alliance at the 2017 Tech Valley Regional, which was when I was a mentor on Shaker. Team 333, who I mentor now, picked them, and then the two of us worked together to figure out a really good third robot, and together all 3 of us took home our first blue banners, winning that event and pulling off an upset against 195 and 20 in semis, which was the most exciting moment of my first career so far.
Makes sense. And now Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie. So I was on 1675 in Wisconsin as a student. And then I went to college and I mentored in college, which was fun, but a terrible choice with 3928 Team Neutrino. After graduating, I moved to Texas and I worked with 1296, the Full Metal Jacket. And then when I moved to California, I joined 253, the Boba Bots. And then my favorite alliance is really hard because every alliance I've been on has been like, they all have something about them that I was really happy about. So then I'm going to go with like my favorite alliance I've seen. And I think it's like the classic 217, 148, 1114 in 2008. I think because I was a freshman and just seeing them all pair up was wild. And it was like, it's one of those times where you see some stuff align and you're like, wow, that alliance was meant to be. And so that was why that's my favorite.
For sure, that was an incredible alliance to watch. So let's start it off with like, I guess a pretty easy question, but like when approaching a given season in a game, how do you go about like figuring out what kind of information that you want for that particular game? If anyone wants to start it off, we can, popcorn it off or whatever.
I'll start. So basically what I like to do with my team is do a massive brain dump of pretty much every possible thing we can come up that we might potentially want. And then we go through one by one and we talk about each thing that we come up with and try and come up with a situation where we try and figure out, 1, how we would collect that data, and 2, if we can figure out a situation either relating to planning out a match or preparing for a line selection where we think that data would actually be useful. And basically we just call the herd down until we get a reasonable number of things that we can both collect reasonably in a match and also think will be useful.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, mine's the same way of like throw everything on the wall and then just pare down. I think I also focus on like what's a reasonable system that my team can build with what we have. And so it's like, can we actually get all of the positions the robot has gone and reliably store that and then present it? Probably not. We're gonna nix that. And I also just kind of start with, I'd have my strategist to go through like what would be information we'd actually need. We start there, and then I think the big thing is also just as we watch events, we update what we need because we're never gonna know the first try unless we're really lucky.
That makes sense. I think Shelby, you're muted.
Oh.
Oh, actually, no, you're not. That was interesting.
We do a similar thing where we just go through everything we can think of. We definitely start with like way too much, and like we go through and get rid of stuff we don't think we'll need. And then, like Katie said, we also kind of like understanding our resources and what is actually like reasonable for us to collect and manage, and things like that. So pretty similar to everyone else.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone's kind of like talking about it similarly to how people design robots, right? They like try to like throw everything out and then they try to like bring it back and then iterate. So like, are there examples like that stick out in your mind where like you've either collected way too much data or like not enough, and then like after a regional or after like a district champs, you like come back and say like, hey, I need like this, or I need to get rid of this because this is too much. Yeah, Katie.
All right. So my first year in 1296. We did too much and not enough. The too much is we started recording things like vowels and text vowels, and Spectrum had come to visit and they looked at our sheet and they're like, why are you even collecting that? You're never going to use it. And then I was like, he's right. I've never looked at this before. So that was like a too much. And then not enough was we got excited about how a robot performed in one match and we added them to our list. And then we ended up picking them and they were a little worse for wear. And so that was when we learned like, oh, have your pit crew go through this pit and just give us a list of like robots that will probably fall apart after 4 matches.
Interesting. So actually, like for everyone here, that's an interesting point. Like, do you have other parts of your team that like provides feedback into your scouting system? So like either for your pick listing or for like strategy?
We don't have a good procedural way of doing it, but we do try and get our drive coach in the room for the beginning of the pick listing meeting, as well as someone from our pit crew. Because a lot of the time the people in the pit go around, they look at other robots, they overhear things. If we have a match with a team, they might go check them out beforehand. And we find that can be very useful information from the pit crew. And with the drivers, it's very good to get a read on their experience working with different teams.
That makes sense.
One of our like mechanical mentors and a couple students to check out kind of everyone who's on our pick list. And then they also, like if we have cheesecake or things like that, those are the guys who would be figuring out what robots are cheesecakeable and if we would have the cheesecake on by quarterfinals or by semifinals and kind of what that looks like. And they usually give that information back to us.
That makes sense. It's actually like segueing from people in the pit, right? Like giving feedback. So this is, I think like a big point of contention amongst like, people in the scouting community and like online and stuff. But one, I would like to hear from you. What's your favorite, if you could ask one question when you go pit scouting, what would it be? And two, what are your thoughts on pit scouting? Like, do you think it's useful? Do you think it's a waste of time? Are there like any good examples of when you've used it in your, like when it came to like a limbs or for picking? Let's start off with Katie.
Okay, so if I had to ask one question, it would be how many dogs are on your team? And as far as pit scouting is useful, the number one thing I want from pit scouts is for them to put pictures of robots on our Slack, because the hardest thing during a pick list meeting is saying like, okay, so that team, what robot are they? They're the ones with the saran wrap. And then if you see a picture though, you're like, oh yeah, salad bowl. So I think like the pictures is the number one most important thing. And the other thing I do with pit scouting, and I think some teams really hate this, is I do like having younger students go pit scout because it's kind of forcing them to start asking questions and looking at robots and like learn all of the things. But otherwise, like, I kind of care about your drive base, and like I like the yes, no, they have a floor pickup or something. But beyond that, I don't care how many wheels you have really. Oh, I also have my scouts take notes of how organized their pit is, because we learned at one event that having an alliance partner who has an organized pit is going to be better in the end than an alliance partner with a pit that looks like chaos.
That's a very good point. Shelby or Brian, do you have any, what are your favorite, like what's your favorite question to ask when you go pit scouting?
Yeah. So I will echo Katie. Having if I can have one thing, it's pictures of robots. One thing that we actually do, we use a Google form for all of our scouting data. Well, we use it for our pit scouting data. It dumps to a Google sheet, and we actually have a clever little formula that one of our students figured out that makes it so when you enter a team number into our like team lookup dashboard, it shows the pictures from our pit scouting data next to it, which is really helpful and not hard to implement. If I have to come up with an original answer, one thing that we have on our scouting sheet that is completely unscientific is we have the person who's pit scouting them rate on a 1 to 5 scale, from like super janky robot to very clean and like well put together. Like I said, not scientific at all, but it's good to keep in mind, especially in the context of like this team is having a lot of issues while their wiring is all spaghetti and the whole thing looks shoddy, so it's possibly a reason for concern, especially when it comes to troubleshooting those electrical issues. And just generally with pit scouting, my philosophy is focus on things that are hard to observe during matches. I don't want to know anything about what they actually score. I might throw in a question about like a pickup or something, an intake off the floor, just because like for most games, it doesn't really make sense to track for every game piece is coming from the floor or from a feeder station. So it's nice to get that info there, but I usually try and focus on things that are very difficult to observe during the match, like drivetrain stuff.
Okay. Shelby?
Probably pictures are definitely probably the most important thing also. But we look at like drivetrain a lot that our pit scouts collect. Like that's probably something we spend a decent amount of time looking at during like pick list meetings. We're not huge Mecanum fans, so. But I don't like particularly like pit scouting. You get a lot of weird answers about things that aren't particularly accurate. But I think our pit scouting, really we only have like a few questions that are relevant to like strategy, and most of the rest of it is about like cheesecake ability or whether we need to like send our service team over to help them out before a match or things like that. What kind of like language they program in, like things like that that are super basic, that are pretty straightforward answers that hopefully their students won't be getting wrong.
Okay, that makes sense. So actually on that topic that you kind of like started off with, so Shelby, like, do you guys DNP robots who have Mecanum wheels? And how about the rest of y'all? So
it's not like a default DNP. It's definitely a consideration, especially, I mean, like, obviously, like Team Titanium on Einstein in 2017 had Mecanums and they did fine. So it's not, that I think changed our attitude like a little bit. It's not preferable, but it's not like an automatic DNP for sure.
Katie?
Definitely factored in our rankings once. And whether or not that was the right call is really like, it's hard to say in hindsight. It really matters if it matters, I guess. Like in 2015, if you had a Mecanum wheel, great. No one could touch you anyways, unless it was your alliance partner. The thing is, like, a lot of teams who use Mecanum tend to use them because they're cool and not because they're a good design choice. And so those aren't making the top of the list anyways. And like, I don't know, I was on a team who used Mecanum religiously in high school, so I don't really feel bad saying that, of like, we liked Mecanum because it was cool, even though we shouldn't have.
We use Saikran every year on the high school team also, so relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my philosophy is it depends on what we are looking for from that pick. If it's a defense robot, for example, unless they have demonstrated that they can play lights out defense, Mechanum is really not a good look for them. But if it's more of an offensive role, especially in a game where defense isn't as big a factor, I try and think of it from a similar perspective of like other teams who are severely inhibited by defense. So in 2019, it was very hard to go be high up on our pick list if you were a Mechanum robot, just because of how intense defense was. But in 2018, there was one robot that was reasonably high on our pick list at Champs, 494 Martians, who were, they had Mechanum and they had a very good driver. And it was 2018, so defense wasn't a huge factor. They actually played defense on Einstein and did a pretty good job with it. So I think you really need to consider what you're actually looking for and how Mechanum fits into that.
That makes sense. Actually, that's a perfect segue into our next question when you were talking about like Mechanum wheels on offense robots, right? So this comes from our Twitch chat from Holazola 5818, and they ask, how do you handle the ratio of time spent either under defense or doing defense? So I think that applies to like when you're trying to like gauge an offensive robot's capability, right? Because like one robot might be doing really well, but they never get defended, and vice versa. Let's start off with Shelby.
So we do an objectively horrible job of looking at defense, like in every way. And so we honestly don't spend too much time on it. Hopefully that's something like our qualitative scouts would catch, like, hey, this team took a lot of defense this match, which is why this number might be super low. We like mostly look at like averages, and occasionally we'll look at like max scoring potential. And so defense usually isn't like a major thing. We tend to kind of ignore defense because we're bad at understanding it and kind of quantifying it.
It definitely is very hard to try to like get in a number. I know Brian and I have spent a long time trying to figure this out for Fantasy First.
But, we've been going back and forth for years on this issue. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about what Shaker did in 2019, especially at Champs. We had 3 fields on our scouting sheet directly related to defense. We had actually 4. We had 1, the amount of time that team was playing defense during the match on a subjective scale of like a little bit, some of the match, most of the match. We had who they were playing defense on. And then for a team that was receiving, we had how much time they spent playing defense and how good their defense was. Which before that, before Champs, we sat down with all of our scouts and we showed them a few examples of like really, really good defense and less impressive defense, and tried to talk them through what made defense good so they could rate teams well. And the numbers weren't perfect, but it was good enough that we could sort by who had been recorded as having a 4 quality defense, which is the highest number. And we get a list of mostly good defenders. And then for teams who are getting defense, we had how much of the time they were getting defense on that same sum of the match scale, and who was playing defense on them. So that was the last bit's really helpful, because if we could see, 1690 only scored 2 game pieces, who did that to them? And I'm a big fan of when looking at the data, looking at like the line graph of how many game pieces they're scoring in their matches over time. So I see a dip, I can look in the breakdown of that match and see, were they getting defense, or did a scout write down that they were broken in that match?
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on that, like a lot of time when I talk about scouting, I talk about 1296 because I was a lot more involved with like how everything was built there, and I learned so many lessons while on that team. So with defense, what Shelby said, like it's like the hardest thing to pin down. But so we always like we have a yes no of like did they play defense, which helps if we're looking at a team who might be switching between offense and defense. And then kind of to answer Karthik's question about like picking a team for defense that hasn't played defense in quals, one of the fields we had was how good of a driver were they? Of like, were they a bad driver, a normal driver, or a good driver? Because seeing like a good driver is a good driver, so they'll be like they should be able to play good defense. Whereas like a bad driver, I don't care what their bot's built for, they're not going to be very good at controlling it. And so for comparing like the defense versus offense, I'm a huge fan of graphs and like visualizing data and not looking at averages. And so you can kind of see like, okay, this team was playing offense. At some point in time, they switched strategies. And then for how teams played against defense, I like to look at how many objects a team has picked up because my scouts are going to be watching them anyways. And if I can see that they picked up, so for example, 2018, if I can see that they picked up 10 cubes but only scored like 8, I don't know, that's not a very good delta, but then I'll say like, okay, that maybe they were under defense. But if they picked up 10 cubes and only scored 2, it's like, okay, well then they're probably bad at defense, like playing against defense anyways. So I try to also look at like how attempts basically, because attempts are telling me just as much as success. Because attempts also are giving you a better idea of what the scoring potential could be.
That makes sense. So actually, Katie, like what went to Karthik's question, right? So just to say it out loud for like future like YouTube streams or whatever, Karthik asked in the chat, how do you feel about picking teams for defense that haven't played defense at all in quals? He provided a notable example of, I think last year, 5406 picked 1310 for defense at champs, and it got them to Einstein finals, and it was amazing. So like Shelby, Brian, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so like this year we did that. We picked like 4593, I think, at Great Northern, and this is a team, like they come to Colorado every year, so like we know this team, and we know that we can trust them. I think Karthik mentioned that in a different comment he made, like we knew we could trust this team. We know that they do the things that we ask them to do, that they do them well. And for our third pick or our second pick this year, a big thing was whether they could climb consistently or not, which this team was able to do that. So the biggest thing for us was like, is it someone we can trust and can they climb? And that team checked both of those boxes for us really well. So we were very confident in that pick.
That's a really interesting point, right? About like knowing a team's history and like being able to trust a team. Like, how does that like factor into like how you pick? I guess. Like Brian, do you have anything to say on this?
Before I do that, I just have one more thing to add on the defense thing. I found one thing that I recommend doing is if you're considering picking a team to play defense who hasn't played defense before, ask them beforehand if they'd be cool with that, because we picked a team in that situation one time and didn't check with them before that, and they were not happy about playing that role, and gave us a hard time about it. And if we had known that, maybe we would have picked someone else. As far as teams we work well with, I kind of think of it. I think it's a slight. If I know I work well with a team, I kind of use it as like a tiebreaker type thing. Like if I'm choosing between two teams who have similar robots, and I know that one of them we're going to work really well with, I'll usually go for that pick. But I usually wouldn't prioritize that over like a significant difference in robot ability, unless I know that I don't work well with one team. That can be a significant penalty for a team on my list. And I really don't believe in DNPing teams for being difficult to work with. I think if a mentor is really abrasive and mean and hostile, that's an appropriate situation to DNP. But I think that at some point, there comes a point where you might have to suck it up and work with someone you're not thrilled to work with if that's your only shot of winning the event.
That makes sense. I'll throw it back to y'all in a second, but Karthik's providing some pretty good input in the chat. He's like the fourth panelist here. So if you could join on the chat, that'd be great, Karthik.
Yeah, Karthik, why aren't you on this?
He still has a link, so he could. But he said something really interesting about like how sometimes they look at picking like a team that has a good drive coach to work with, like in the case where you like have a couple of different teams who like stand out the same, like you pick out like someone who you know you can work with and know like you can do strategy with. Does that like factor into the rest of y'all's picks? Especially, I guess like this is more important at champs when you're trying to like work with them for a longer period of time. I know Katie had to do this a couple of times to get to Einstein, right? 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
Those great runs.
I wasn't even there. So 2017, I remember we were the number 1 seed, and it was between like Bomb Squad and 1323. And the way those teams were treating us in trying to get our answer of like which one we were going to pick didn't 100% factor in who we picked, but it definitely didn't hurt. I mean, I think when teams are being rude and pushy, like I understand why sometimes I'm rude and pushy, because you're just trying to do what's best for your team. But also like how teams work with you and how you just get along. Like if you can jive well, I think it's better. The best alliances are always kind of alliances where everyone's friends. So like I think of 1114, 900, 1923, and 100, 148, 148. I'm gonna start calling them that. In 2015, I think they kind of got some bad luck in there that caused them to not make it all the way. But they had like good communication behind the scenes because they all got along. Also, they'd make crazy things together. So I do think like how well you work with a team matters. I don't think it's ever come up other than like when we're in a pick list meeting and our drive coach is like, oh man, they were awful. But rarely does it come up. But like on the other flip side, if we're like between two teams and the drive coach overhears, they might be like, oh yeah, like I actually really liked working with those guys. So they might be like a tiebreaker. Like Brian said, it's really hard to just neg someone because of how they acted, because like sometimes that robot is the right robot. Like you're not getting married, you're just going through Elans.
Yeah, I'll elaborate a little bit on one bit of that. I definitely agree. Like most teams, by definition, are average to work with. There are some teams that are really good to work with, and others that are really not good to work with. And I'm much more likely to factor that in for a team if they're at one of those extremes.
That makes sense.
Otherwise, I just don't remember if they're just a team.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Unless Shelby has something she'd like to add to that, I can move on to the next question. So this comes from one of our good friends, Max from 5254. So he asked a question about how do you handle making the final decision about your third robot in the heat of the moment during a line selection? I'm curious how your answer changes based off if you're the captain or if you're picked on someone else. I think Shelby has probably some good insights based off her Einstein win in 2017. Your third pick was 54.99, right? I guess like how do y'all come up with that? What was like the process there?
We were just along for the ride. Yeah, no, like genuinely on 10-11 we had 20 students. We had 3 mentors. We had we had a scouting process and stuff like that, but it wasn't anything comparable to 973. So it was just that entire process was just full faith in 973 pretty much across the board.
That makes sense. So how's that changed from your current regional runs with 1619?
I forgot what the question was on.
Oh, it's how do you handle making the final decision for your third picks if there are disagreements or whatever?
So we honestly typically don't really have too many disagreements. Our scouting team is fairly small, and our first picks are generally mostly data-driven picks, and then our second picks are usually kind of a bit data and a mix of input from our qualitative scouts. We usually only have 3 or 4 qualitative scouts at most, so it's difficult for us to have major disagreements. I wasn't on the team in 2017. I know 2017 champs there was like a lot of discussion about our picks then, but really while I've been on the team, we really haven't experienced any like difficult choices. And that's partially because like in 2019, we were like 20th in our division, so we weren't picking regardless. So we didn't have to deal with that at that point in time. But generally, if we are getting picked, you know, we like to like compare lists just to make sure there aren't any like major discrepancies, but you always have to default to your alliance captain. That's just kind of like the respectful thing to do. So.
That makes sense. How about Katie or Brian? Do you have like any like memorable like disagreements you've had with your alliance partners or even within your team of who you did and didn't want to pick?
So I mean,
Yeah,
what's
so I've
fun is
had-
when you go.
Let's go. Oh, Katie.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Katie. Go, Katie.
Yeah,
Okay.
go Katie.
So when you asked this question, I was like, but I'm not on the field when they do this. And I was like, oh wait, but one time I actually was. So in 2011, when I was a senior, my team got to captain like the 8th seed on Curie, which like Curie Curse 8th seed, we were doomed anyways. But so I remember like I had my list and I had like been really confident in it. And so I like picked my first seed. I think it was Adam Bot. I know who it was. And then, you know, the MC gives us our cursory 5 seconds and they're like, okay, time to pick again. And the guy is like, I think we should pick. And I was like, no. Because like I had known who my second pick was going to be. It was 1678. I think they were probably really disappointed. They had the best mini bot on the field. And they probably were really disappointed they got picked up by the 8th seed. But it was like, in that situation, I was like, I'm the alliance captain. I know exactly what I want and why I want. And we're the 8th seed. Like, they're not going to give us any time. And then in 2018, they were like, my student and the 1533 were like trying to pick their last robot. And we like, he had his list and his list had notes about every team that was on the list. And so they're like, we should pick this. And he's like, no, but actually this team. And so I think for them, it was like, at the end of the day, you have to default to the alliance captain. They're the alliance captain. But it's like having the data with you and saying like this team and why, and, you know, like have a discussion about it. They shushed the MC away like 3 times because they're like, no, we need more time to talk. Because again, they were the A seed, but picking was wonky in that field. So they were going to do fine. Well, they ended up doing fine.
I should maybe clarify, our picks are done like off field, like our student who's on the field doesn't have like a list or anything. We do picks like off the field and then just like show them a whiteboard. So we usually have like a team of like 6 people figuring that stuff out like on the sidelines. So the student who's on the field usually doesn't have to worry about anything except reading 4 numbers.
Actually, on that topic, sorry to like switch it away, Brian, from the previous one, but like, how do you guys like, because it sounds like Katie and Shelby have like completely different philosophies on like who makes the picks. Like Brian, where do you fall on this? Right? Do you have like the student on field make all the, like the decisions or?
Yeah. So we usually have, the way we usually do it is I like send up a student who, it also depends on whether we're the number 1 alliance captain or not. If we're the number 1 seed, sometimes we'll just send someone up to just read the whiteboard. Because then what happens if we're in that position is we've already reached out to the team we're picking. All of our people are sitting together in the stands. We're all working on the pick together there because we've had time to prepare. And if we locked in the number 1 seed an hour ago, we might have been working on the pick list together for an hour at that point. If we're not in that position, I like to send someone who is very familiar with the ins and outs of the pick list and very quick on their feet, especially if we're not the captain, because we need someone who, while there's a team of people who's going to be in the stands, looking at data, talking to each other, and kind of making sure that we're all on the same page on who we should pick, ultimately it's the person who's down there's call. We're just there to support them. And a big reason we do it that way is in case we're not the captain and we need to persuade someone to pick the team we want to pick. And we need someone who knows the data and can make those arguments.
That makes sense. So it sounds like there are two distinct picking strategies, like based off if you're like for seed, right? You can just, send like a list up there. But, if you are like on the 8th seed or 7th seed, right, you have to like make those decisions. Does anyone else have anything they want to say on that topic? If not, I can move on to the next question.
I just hate whiteboards.
I just have one.
You go. I went first last time. Now it's your turn.
Yeah. There we go. I have one more thing about the working with different teams. Like when you're the first pick trying to contribute for the pick list, I really try and stress with them, hey, we have as much time as we need to work this out. Let's build consensus and come up with someone that we're both going to be really happy with. And then once we get them on the same page with that, whether they're the captain or they're the first pick, we try and we make sure we're on the same page about what we're looking for in the pick. So, it doesn't help if we just throw numbers at each other. If one of us is looking for a defense robot and the other thinks maybe the captain thinks they should be the defense robot and wants a scoring robot. Didn't happen to me, but did happen to someone else I was talking to. So, extreme example, but it's good to make sure you're on the same page for what you're looking for. And then once we get to that point, we throw numbers around. We say who we most want. They say who they most want. And since we are on the same page about what we're looking for, we can actually have a conversation about which of those better suits our needs. And when we're the captain, we try and listen to what the first pick has to say, because especially if they really have their scouting together and like run a good operation there, because they might have noticed something that we didn't. And there have been situations in the past where we've gone a spot or two down our list to make our first pick happy.
That makes sense. Katie, you're saying something about whiteboards.
I hate whiteboards. We had to write no on a whiteboard once, and like the entire audience oohed, and it was like a terrible feeling. We do have like a tech
They're gonna ooh either way though.
Yeah, but when you say no, everyone freaks out like it's the end of the world. But we do I guess we don't send the student up there like on their own. They typically have like someone who's texting them of like, it's the sanity check of like, okay, because by the time we're going on the field, we've spent so much energy into our list that like, I tell my captain who's going down there of like, listen, if you're like really, really like your gut's saying like go deviate from the list, then like, trust your gut. But they're gonna follow the list. That's just kind of how it ends up going. And so we like confirm with them, because I like don't want my captain to feel like they're an island. But for the third pick, I think like we send like who we think we might want. But beyond that, it's like, you guys have the information, you have your partner. I just trust my student, because I'm always sending down a student who's prepared as well. I will not send down someone who gets to read a whiteboard, not because I think there's anything wrong with that, but because our process does not allow for that. But yeah,
that makes sense.
I'm still more
I hate
fan
them so much.
cell phones than whiteboards in the year 2020.
I love this panel itself, because I think everyone here has like a completely different view on scouting, right? And I think that's great. So on kind of like on that note, are there like any actually, like if you know your alliance like at champs the night before, right? Do y'all have any memorable scouting meetings, or like do you reach out to the people you're going to pick or you're confident are going to pick you, so you can like collaborate on a scouting pick list? For me, like some of my most memorable scouting moments are like when we worked with 1323 in our 2018 pick list, or with 3132 on our 2015 pick list. It's always a lot of fun for mentors, because like we get to talk to other people, and like our kids are always having a lot of fun too. I remember our kids started laughing when they heard like an Australian accent, just because it was like late at night and they were excited, but it's memorable. Shelby, do you have any like ideas or experiences with that?
Yeah, I think, let's see, our 2019 and our 2017 experiences. I was on 10-11 was obviously 2017, and 16-19 was 2019. Wildly different experiences. So, but similar like outcomes. So on 10-11, we like had our scouting meeting. We were like 8th seed, I think. We like talked a little bit to 973, a little bit to 1574. Neither was like giving us too much like info on whether we would be the pick or not. But we like finished our scouting meeting. We were feeling kind of awful. Like we just weren't particularly happy with how things were going. And then at like 11:30, we got a text from 973 and they were like, you guys are it. What time can we meet tomorrow? And everyone was just like so excited. It was so cute. And like we felt really good about that alliance. Like it was kind of like, we like felt like we could get to Einstein. Like we definitely never thought we would win everything, but we definitely were like, we can do this, which was really neat. And also literally none of us had ever been in a position like that before. Like none of our students, none of our mentors. So it was really fun to like do all of that together. And then 2019 was a similar thing where we were just like, I mean, we were sitting in 20th in our division. So we were just like, you know, letting fate do whatever it was going to do. We knew 254 probably wasn't going to be picking us. Like our reliability was pretty horrible throughout the event. So we're just kind of waiting for like someone to tell us that they would be picking us. So it was kind of a similar thing, except we just felt kind of awful because champs was not what it was supposed to be.
That makes sense. Katie, sounds like you have a. Or is that just Gatsby?
That was Gatsby, actually. No, 1296 did a meeting with 1323, but that was one of the years that Fex Worlds overlapped with champs. And so I just kind of got to be like away in Louisville, Kentucky, just like following along the Slack. It was real sad, but I'm sure my students have great stories.
Yeah. The one time we were a first overall pick in a division, we actually weren't told. It was 2019. 1676 was the number one seed. And they did not give us an answer until the morning, like basically as we're on the way to the venue, that they were going to pick us, which we were not thrilled about because we had to spend a bunch of time at our pick listing meeting preparing for a bunch of scenarios. We don't know when exactly they made the decision, so I don't want to drag them too hard. They were otherwise great to work with, but it was just frustrating. We're like, we know that that PASCAC is probably going to pick us, but we still have to prepare for all these other scenarios anyway, and that was a bit frustrating.
That makes sense. So this is another question from chat. This is from Karthik again. This was like 30 minutes ago, but I think it's still interesting. It's like, it's kind of like going against everything that we've been saying, or like a different topic. But how do you all deal with like the small sample size in scouting? Because, you know, there are only a couple of matches and it's really hard to like figure out like what's good data and like what's just, you know, them like, you know, getting warmed up. Does anyone like have any favorite methods they do? And actually, I'd like to introduce our fourth panelist, Gatsby. If you have anything you'd like to say, I'd appreciate that.
No.
Brian, actually, like, do you have any good answers for like how you deal with the small sample size?
Yeah, so I really like, when I'm looking at the data for a team, I really want to understand what the story is behind the data. If there are any trends up or down or sideways or inconsistencies, I want to know what happened. So usually I leave our pick listing meeting with like a list of like 20 questions that I want to ask teams that basically boil down to, hey, you guys didn't score that much in this match. Did you get broke? If you broke, what was the solution and the issue? So I come up with a lot of questions like those and really try and suss out why the data looks the way it does.
That makes sense. Shelby, do you have any?
Don't like qualitative or quantitatively look at like up tracks like at the end of the day before elins or things like that, but definitely whenever we're also a fan of like the graph of like how many games are scored in a match. So definitely at least take a pick at that, or not a pick, at least take a peek at that before we finalize picks, just to make sure that like if their last 4 matches were bad and their first 4 matches were great and that's why their average is high, things like that you can take a look at and try to at least talk to them the next day and figure out why that might be happening, or watch the match video or something like that. It's not like a huge factor, but it's definitely a consideration.
That makes sense.
Everyone else covered it.
All right, we have
I actually have a good story on this one. The favorite alliance that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, where I said we had a really good second pick that we're really happy with. They were this random second-year team from Quebec who's pretty good at scoring gears, the primary scoring objective. But they had like a 50% climb rate calls. They hit like their first 4 calls at climbs and then missed their later climb. So it's just like, oh, their climber broke. Okay. Let me go over and talk to them and figure out what the deal is. And their issue was that they had a Velcro roller climb and they didn't put Velcro on the rope. So they were relying on like the rope being like a little bit frayed, but then it ran out of stickiness. And then their climb wouldn't work because it couldn't hold on to the rope. And we were like, oh, that's it. The climber is working fine. It's not broken. And they were like, nope, it's just not sticking to the rope. And I was like, have you guys thought about putting Velcro on it? And they're like, we didn't have a chance to. And I would have sent someone over then and there to do that with them, but like our robot was broken because of some stupid reason. But then we picked them and they climbed in almost every match in quals, I think elims, and actually climbed one match when we didn't. So really clutch pick, and I'm glad we just stopped by and asked them why their climber wasn't working because it was such a stupid easy solution.
That makes sense. So we're almost out of time, but we have a couple of questions from chat, so we're going to go through some of these like a little quicker. I think like my favorite one so far is how long do your pick list meetings last, and how much match video do you review during those pick list meetings?
Depends on how good the scouts are. Every meeting lasts at least an hour. I don't like for them to last infinity long because that's just really boring at some point. And like 253 was in an alliance captain selection position. And as we were going through our data, everyone realized, like, I just gave everyone a team of like, okay, go do the averages and everything. Because we do like a note card strategy for sorting. So I gave everyone like their note cards and they all were like, this data is terrible. So I'm pretty sure my kids actually just rewatched the entire regional, if not like most of the regional. So like, yes, but I don't like for them to last super long because we're just gonna get ourselves super tired and there's diminishing returns when you hit like after so long, typically 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. I don't think it's ever lasted longer than 3.
I'm really bad about that. I don't know when to pull the ripcord. Shelby?
Yeah, I think our GNR picklist meeting, I think, was like 45 minutes. Like it was so fast. It was awesome. But we usually definitely try to stick under an hour if we can. It depends, obviously, like what position you're in. On 1619, at all of our regionals except GNR that I've been on the team for, we've seeded first. So it's, I think, a little easier in some ways whenever you're in that position because you get to kind of make the rules a little bit. You don't have to worry about so many different scenarios that might happen. In terms of like how much footage we watch, it really depends on like our confidence in our defense picks. We almost always only watch for defense reasons. I think we also usually don't watch full matches. So usually we'll watch, I don't know, a dozen, not more than 2 dozen like partial matches. We also usually like we'll continue our discussion while someone else is watching a match and then they can give like the feedback. So usually it's not like everyone stops and watches a match together and then continues the discussion. We usually parse it up a little bit.
That makes sense. Brian?
Yeah, our meetings are usually I don't know how you have hour-long pick listing meetings. I definitely want to talk offline about how that works. But at regionals, we're usually in the 2 to 3 hour range. For champs, it's a bit longer, usually 4 or 5-ish. We don't watch much video. The one exception to that is 2019, where we did a lot for defense. But like Shelby said, we usually wouldn't all watch it together. I'd usually, tell one kid who has a good sense for how good the defense is, hey, go watch team 771 in a couple matches off to the side and like tell me how good their defense is. Because we collected that defense data I mentioned before, which helped, but it's not the same as like having one of like our core strat kids watching and really tearing it apart.
That makes sense. So just two more questions. So one is like, do you use TBA in your scouting data, or like the first API? Rachel earlier today, Rachel Lim gave like an amazing workshop on like how to use component OPRs and did some really cool error stuff. I urge everyone to look at the video of that. But in the meantime, just like very quickly, like, do you use it, and like what do you use it for? Anyone?
I've never been able to
We don't.
I never gave time to the TBA API, so I haven't used it. But if I would, it would purely be a checksum of do the tallies in the API, because normally they can count things like number of XYZ scored. Does that match what the kids reported? That's like probably the best use of it. Also, counting anything that's really hard to count, or like it's stupid for us to count if the API could do it. But that said, I've never took the time to get it to work out. I finally was able to make query calls like a month ago.
Yeah. One thing, we don't use it. I want to use it for especially in game, because you actually do get the by robot in game data from TBA. And at first I was concerned about reliability issues with that, but I think First and TBA have demonstrated that they can do it reliably. So that's something I'm going to look at doing next season. I haven't done the like the validating side of it during the season, but during the off season, when I had a bit more time, I put together a system that basically takes the same math that behind OPR, and instead of using it to look at how much robot scores, to try and guess, because when you get, if you know that the Blue Alliance in one match scored 10 game pieces, and that your numbers don't add up to 10, someone messed up. You don't know who messed up. So we use the same logic behind OPR to try and figure out who were the most error-prone scouts. And the numbers we got actually looked about right.
I would love to see a Chief Delphi paper on this. That's like a big problem for us, and I'd like to have a good solution. Shelby, do y'all use TBA? Or?
We don't. We talk about it. I think, I don't remember what it was, but we definitely, this year, we usually make like goals for each competition, and like improvements in the system between events and whatever. And I think for our second event, we wanted to implement some kind of API stuff, but I really genuinely don't remember what that was.
That makes sense. And before we end it for the night, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. And I'm going to ask one last question for all of y'all. Just to, like, we kind of started it off on what's your favorite alliance. So what's like the favorite alliance partner you've ever worked with? Just, Katie, and then Shelby, and then Brian.
Oh God, 1625, because they're my best friends.
That makes sense.
I'm not prepared for this.
Whenever I was on 1011, 1619 was my favorite partner to work with. So
that makes sense. Brian?
Actually, same. When I was on 2791, 333 was my favorite partner. That was just a really special alliance that we're all on together. And like, it was both of our teams' first win after, like, for 2791, we'd been around for 9 seasons. For 333, they'd been around since like for almost 20 years. So we both like struck the right balance of like, we both really wanted it badly and we're really in it to win it. But we're also like goofing around and having a good time together.
That makes sense.
2017 IRI is my honorable mention.
195?
Yeah, that was a fun alliance.
195 is great to play with. I'm a big fan.
So I haven't played with them. Justin is asking in the chat why the answer was not 5254. We'll take the answer offline. But my answer to that actually mirrored Shelby and Brian's. Was when I was a student in 2013, I got to play Elims with Code Orange, and that was so much fun. And now I regret that. No, just kidding. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. It was so much fun for me. I hope that like y'all are super easy to find on Chief Delphi. If anyone has any questions, like feel free to bug them. They're all like very nice people, and I think would be very happy to answer questions. I hope this was useful for people. So thank you, Shelby, Katie, and Brian. I hope to talk to y'all like very soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Ike, for putting this together. This was a ton of fun.
Thank you.